I woke up one morning to find my driveway chained shut, heavy-duty padlocks at both ends like some kind of prison gate. And when the sheriff pulled up later, he didn't scold me. He laughed, shook his head, and said, "Been waiting all week to see what she'd do next." That was the moment I realized the war with my HOA president had gone way past rules and fines. It had turned into something darker, personal, obsessive, and almost insane. It all started with cars blocking my driveway. The first time I thought it was an accident. But when a shiny black SUV rolled up at 4 in the morning and parked square across the mouth of my garage, I knew it was deliberate. My car was trapped inside. I had work meetings to get to, and all I could do was call the sheriff's office. They promised to send someone when available, which was their polite way of saying no one was coming. So I walked half a mile to the bus stop like some college kid, and while I stood there waiting, coffee-deprived and fuming, the SUV drove past. In the passenger seat sat Margaret Lawson Meg, our HOA president. She gave me this smug little smile, sipped her latte, and tossed her hair like she was in a shampoo commercial. I didn't say a word. People like her feed off reactions, and I wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. But inside, I knew this wasn't just pettiness anymore. It was a message. Meg had already fined me for leaving my trash can visible for half an hour, for painting my shutters a shade of blue she didn't like, even for letting my brother park on the street during Thanksgiving. She treated every blade of grass in our cul-de-sac like it was her personal kingdom. And now she was using cars blocking my driveway, cutting off my access to my own house. It was more than annoying, it was control. That's when something my father used to say popped into my head. Every problem has a practical solution. The trick is choosing the one that embarrasses the problem the most. I sat in my garage staring at my old workbench and the tools I'd inherited from him. Meg thought she was clever playing her timing games, parking just long enough to ruin my day, then pulling away before the cops could do anything. She thought she had me cornered. But wars aren't won by noise. They're won by traps. That's how I came up with the idea. Not explosives. I'm not crazy, but something that would make enough noise to humiliate her. I rigged up a set of mats, each hiding a pressure-triggered boat horn underneath. Step or drive on it and the thing would scream like a banshee. I laid 3 across my driveway, looking like I'd just left some mats out to dry. Then I waited. 2 mornings later, Meg's black SUV crept up slow and smug like it was claiming territory. The second, the tires hit the first mat. Bam, the horn went off, deafening, rattling windows down the street. The driver panicked, hit the brakes, which set off the second horn, and by the time they tried to back up the third one, detonated. It was chaos. Birds scattered from the trees, porch lights flicked on, neighbors yanked their curtains open. And then there was Meg flying out of the passenger seat in her robe and curlers, shrieking at the driver like her life depended on it. The whole neighborhood saw her. Someone even filmed it. And I just stood calmly on my porch, sipping coffee. "Everything okay out there?" I called. Her face turned crimson, but her words were drowned out by the horns. That was the day the balance shifted. The video spread through the block in hours. Meg, the queen of control, reduced to a screaming mess in her pajamas. I'd already checked with the sheriff, and he'd told me, as long as it's not explosive or flammable, you're good. When I mentioned the horn idea, he smirked. Hell, I'd pay to see their faces when it goes off. So when the video blew up in the neighborhood chat, he wasn't scolding me. He drove by, leaned out his cruiser, and laughed, "Nice work with the landmines," right in front of Meg. That moment, she lost her grip, and she knew it. But people like Meg don't just give up, they double down. Within days, she called an emergency HOA meeting in the church basement. I walked in late on purpose, coffee in hand, while she sat up front flanked by her sidekicks Greg and Denise. She slammed her pen on the folding table like she was running the Senate. "We need to address the dangerous traps set by one of our residents," she screeched. Gasps here, a few nods there. But most of the neighbors had already seen the video. They knew the only child traumatized was Meg herself, screaming in curlers. I stood up and said loud enough for the room to hear, "So you're admitting your SUV was blocking my driveway?" The room rippled with murmurs. Even Denise, flipping through her rulebook, muttered, "Technically, his driveway isn't community property." The motion died right there. Some neighbors laughed. Some even asked me if I could rig their driveways too. Meg's face looked like she'd swallowed vinegar. That's when I felt a pang of doubt. Alone in my house that night, I thought maybe I'd gone too far. Maybe the horns were childish. Maybe I was feeding the very drama I wanted to escape. For a moment, I considered tearing the mats up, surrendering, letting Meg win just to have peace again. But then I remembered that walk to the bus stop, her smug smile, the way she wanted me to bow to her authority. I heard my dad's voice again. Every problem has a solution. The best one embarrasses the problem. I wasn't done. Not yet. Meg wasn't either. She taped violation notices to my door. She hired a crew to drop orange cones across my driveway with laminated signs claiming reserved for emergency vehicles. I called the fire department, and within an hour, a marshal was at my house shaking his head. No permits, no authorization. He said, then handed me a written statement. That night, I taped copies of it to every cone and left them exactly where Meg had staged them. By the next morning, the whole block was laughing about Conegate. Someone photoshopped her face onto a traffic cone. She was unraveling, but she wasn't finished. Soon, I spotted an unmarked Ford truck idling near my house, cigarette glowing inside. The next morning, muddy tire tracks cut across my lawn. Subtle intimidation. I reinforced my mats, this time with paint packs. Sure enough, 2 men in hoodies crept up one night. One stepped on the mat, splat, neon blue paint exploded all over him. He slipped, set off the horn, and both scrambled back to the truck covered in paint while my cameras caught everything. By dawn, the video was in the chat. HOA brings in backup, backup gets slimed. The sheriff came by, chuckling. Funny thing, blue paint all over Greg's driveway this morning. That's when I realized it wasn't strangers. Meg had roped her own board members into doing the dirty work. She escalated again this time with chains stretched across my driveway, padlocked tight. I didn't touch it. I just called the sheriff, handed him the ransom-style note she'd shoved in my mailbox. He laughed, said I should be mad, but honestly, I've been waiting to see what she'd try next. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip. And Meg. She staged an entire community safety rally on her lawn, complete with flyers, lemonade stands, and a rented podium. She painted me as a menace, warning the crowd about booby traps and driveway terrorism. But mid-speech, I dropped a video clip in the group chat, Meg herself dragging that chain across my driveway, muttering about teaching me a lesson. Phones lit up, heads bent, murmurs spread. The rally fizzled right there. By the time she noticed, half the chairs were empty. Desperate, she made her boldest move yet. One morning, I woke to find construction crews tearing up the street in front of my driveway. Meg had hired them cash under the table to install a so-called speed bump, really a concrete barrier blocking me in completely. I called the sheriff on speaker loud enough for the crew to hear. Their foreman went pale when he realized there was no permit. By the time deputies arrived, the crew had packed up and fled, leaving a half-dug trench. The sheriff looked at Meg and said flatly, "Lady, if I have to explain this one more time, you'll be learning it from a holding cell." Her face burned crimson. She stormed off without a word. That was the first crack in her armor. But the real collapse came later. Meg rented heavy machinery concrete barriers, a skid loader, and had them delivered to our cul-de-sac. She stood in her sun hat, directing workers like a dictator, unveiling a monument. The cops arrived within minutes asking for permits. She waved her HOA clipboard like it was law. HOA approval isn't a permit, they told her. When they ordered her to remove the barriers, she snapped. She climbed into the loader herself, fumbling with the controls, slamming one barrier onto the curb with a thunderous crash. Neighbors gasped. Some even clapped. The officers dragged her out sun hat, flying screaming nonsense about tyranny and conspiracies. They cuffed her right there in the street in front of everyone. Greg slunk home. Denise was nowhere to be seen. Meg, the almighty queen of our HOA, was hauled off in a squad car shrieking that she was the president. The sheriff just chuckled. Not for long. That was the end. The HOA collapsed days later. Greg resigned, Denise quit, and neighbors voted to dissolve the board entirely. Meg put her house up for sale, her reign of pettiness buried under the weight of her own ridiculous schemes. And me, I still sip coffee on my porch every morning, the mats sitting there like trophies. Because the truth is, it wasn't the traps that won. It was patience. Patience-proof and letting her bury herself one humiliation at a time. Sometimes the best trap is just letting the problem walk straight into its own downfall.